Welcome everyone back to the Long View. Nice to be with everyone. I'm here with Charlie Sykes of To the Contrary. Charlie, welcome back. It's nice to talk to you.
Hey, happy Friday. We made it through at least this week.
So I wanted to get your reaction to the interview with Tucker Carlson and Senator Cruz over Iran and what he knew or didn't know about the country. What was your impression of the interview and what we can take from that?
Okay, so we can have a debate about how real the civil war is in MAGA. I mean, the reality is they're all going to get back behind Trump sooner or later. But I did think that very, very entertaining exchange was revealing. I mean, these are two really smart guys, and you really got a glimpse of the intellectual level of MAGA debate there. Also, just the how personal and nasty these fights are. This is the second big personal blow up that we've had in MAGA in the last month, right? I mean, it seems like it was, years ago that we had the Donald Trump Elon Musk fight, but it became so personal, so bitter, so vicious. And I think this is sort of a tell about what's going on in MAGA, that when they fight with one another, it's like back alley broken bottle fighting, personal insults, really, and then they're hard to come back from. And again, in terms of the substance, Tucker was Tucker. Ted Cruz was his usual unctuous self, but not. I mean, look, I have to say, I had to break out the popcorn to watch it over again on YouTube.
How do you feel? I was curious just hearing Senator Cruz not know some basics, given the authority that he has as a senator and his support for military intervention. What do you think of that just on its own?
I am no longer surprised by the ignorance of people in power. I mean, this is really a remarkable thing. And Ted Cruz, again, I always want to emphasize he's not one of the dumb guys. He's not Tommy Tuberville. And yet at the moment when you're talking about attacking a country, overthrowing a regime, not to know basic facts is embarrassing. But again, maybe this is just part of our performative era, Julian, that people just simply sort of strut upon the stage. They come out with their hot takes, and nobody feels the necessity to do the deep dive and, like, what is the substance of what I'm talking about. So the fact that it's infected Ted Cruz should not come as a huge shock, but it was embarrassing.
And then in terms of it's hard to speculate, but is this some kind of break? I mean, not just with Tucker Carlson and Senator Cruz, but would this military operation, do you think, potentially create actual rifts within the GOP?
Well, I've been thinking about that for the last couple of days, and there's a couple of things, and they may be true at the same time. I mean, your default position has to be that no matter what the divisions are, people like Steve Bannon and Charlie Kirk may be opposed to this war, but they're not going to break with Trump over this war. So there is this cultic thing. On the other hand, there is a substantive disagreement here. There are people who actually did believe Donald Trump when he said he was the America First president, who would not get the country involved in foreign wars, who opposed endless wars, and it was actually very, very forceful in his denunciation of the Iraq War. I mean, there are people who really do care about all of that, and they feel like, what a shock! If only they'd been warned. They feel a little bit thrown under the bus by all of this. Now, will long term, short term, it's very hard to know. Here's the thing, though, and again, I've been thinking about just sort of the politics of war. Um, uh, you have to see how it plays out, right? I mean, day one, everybody's going to be on board waving flags. Day one, Donald Trump is going to love being the guy that dropped the big Buster bunker bomb, right? It's the next day and the day after that. It is the fallout. Donald Trump can control what's happening now. He can't control what happens afterwards. So, to your question about the real rift, where does this go? How much disruption are they? What is the escalation? How well planned is this? So, again, you are seeing this jockeying for power and influence in MAGA, and fight for Donald Trump's brain, and that can go back and forth. I mean, we just saw. I'm sorry to digress here, but we just saw on the mother of all tacos, when he changed his mind on immigration raids, and because somebody had said no, you shouldn't go after agriculture, you shouldn't go after hospitality, and he made a definitive statement, we're not going to do it, and then 2 days later he completely reversed himself. So, we're in this really weird moment where it is warfare by whim. Where is Donald Trump's going to go? Where will Donald Trump go? Where is his head at? Um, I'm increasingly think that he's blinked on this one, though.
And where do you think the Republican Party is on foreign policy? I mean, if we look at the trajectory from Reagan to post 9/11 with Afghanistan and Iraq, and now the Trump era, what does that actually mean from your observations about, are there divisions in the party? Is America first actually the agenda for most Republicans? What does that even mean?
Well, I think you have to separate out the MAGA base from, say, elected Republicans. I mean, there's still a remnant, a residue of traditional Republicanism in Congress when it has to when it comes to Iraq. I'm sorry, when it comes to Ukraine and Russia. There's still all those voices out there that do sound like they are part of the party of Ronald Reagan. But then, of course, this is the party of Donald Trump. And Donald Trump is the anti-Reagan when it comes to American exceptionalism, American leadership, the approach to the Cold War. I mean, and you and I have talked about this before. This is one of the most just dramatic turnaround, and it's hard to overstate what it is to watch the party of Ronald Reagan vote with Russia in the United Nations on some issues. So there is a tremendous, there has been a tremendous reversal. Where does Congress come down on all of this? I guess one of the big questions is, where is Congress? What is the role of Congress? Why are members of both parties not standing up and shouting that we should not take the United States to war without congressional action? And we're not seeing that, are we? We're not seeing that either from Republican leaders or from Democratic leaders.
And in terms of governing by whim, which you said a few minutes ago, uh, h- is that how it's happening? I mean, what's your impression of what's going on in the Oval Office, the Situation Room, as this unfolds? Is this President Trump just deciding what he wants to decide? Are there any advisors, you think, who have his ear at this point?
Well, this is actually an incredibly interesting question, isn't it? Who is he actually listening to? Is it true? Is he listening to Laura Loomer? You know that he pays a lot of attention to what goes on Fox News, but I think he's listening to angry podcasters as well. So, who is in that room with him? I think it is extraordinary. What an extraordinary moment that his Secretary of Defense and his Director of National Intelligence have basically been sidelined. I mean, if if there was any question about how deeply unqualified Pete Hegseth and Tulsi Gabbard were, it's the fact that basically he's thrown them under the bus. He's ignoring them. They are not among the advisors, but we don't know the answer to that. What we do know is that right now, Donald Trump feels that he is unconstrained, that he is the unilateral decider. And again, you and I have talked about the imperial presidency. He is reveling in this. He really likes being the focus of attention. He really likes the fact that he alone gets to decide this. But to say that he's out of his depth is putting it mildly. And we're going to write in my newsletter a little bit later, he loves dressing up as the generalissimo, but Donald Trump is not a warrior president. And I really do think the most revealing thing in the last 24 hours was that not only did he step away from the brink of a war with Iran, but he used the 2 week pause. And look, we've been watching this. 2 weeks is a code in Trump world. It's basically a code for, I don't know, maybe never. He keeps, whenever he wants to dodge an issue, whenever he wants to avoid making a decision, he says, well, we'll do it in 2 weeks. It's become a punchline in Washington that he's done this. And I think that was a real tell that he doesn't really, that he likes all of the attention. He likes the power. He would love to be the big guy that drops the big bomb. But he's not a president who wants his presidency to be a wartime presidency, particularly in the Mideast.
How dangerous do you think it is? And we've obviously seen this throughout his first term, and now the social media element of this. I mean, he's still posting, and now we're talking about a very serious military situation
No.
that's real. I mean, how do you think of that in perspective of a president? Not just him, but now this becoming part of the repertoire of how these issues are handled.
Well, we've been living through this for how many years now? I was reminded this morning that we went through this same scenario back in 2017. Remember when he was breathing fire and fury about North Korea, and a lot of us thought, "Oh my God, are we about on the edge of a nuclear confrontation with North Korea?" The fire and fury and all of the tweets about what he was going to do, and they played him, and he backed off. So it was terrifying in 2017. It's still deeply worrisome, although I think we're kind of getting the pattern of Donald Trump, right? That he's, able to throw out these all caps threats. But when he gets pushed back, when he has to face the reality of it, well, he tends to back down. He's looking for an off ramp, any sort of negotiation, any sort of concession. I mean, we know the playbook, right? He will claim some huge victory because as much as he wants to be sort of this great warlord, weirdly enough, he also wants to be known as a peacemaker. And weirdly enough, really, really wants that Nobel Peace Prize. Don't ask. But I mean, these conflicting things are going on in his head right now. The danger to your question about the social media post is the real danger for cataclysm is miscalculation, miscommunication. See World War One. And so when he's tweeting out things like unconditional surrender, what does that mean? Does that mean no negotiations? Who do you surrender to? What does the surrender involve? It's incoherent and can easily be misinterpreted by people who are extremely dangerous.
And of course, with war and military conflict, you don't control everything. I mean,
Right.
I think that's the essence. Presidents might think you can move in one direction, move another, and fix things as they go on, but that's not the logic of war. And it might be this ends up being very contained, but it easily can
Right.
spin away, as George W. Bush learned with Iraq. Initially, there was a lot of enthusiasm and feeling that it was pretty successful, and then stuff happened. And it was a many years of conflagration after that.
Stuff always happens in war, doesn't it? And I think I don't want to give Trump too much credit, but I do think going back to he loves being in control. The moment the war starts, that it becomes uncontrollable. There's 40,000 American troops in harm's way. There can be asymmetric warfare. There are allies. The Iranians do have some allies who can do a lot of damage. What if they blockade the Strait of Hormuz? It would completely disrupt the world economy. Donald Trump doesn't want to doesn't want to manage that. He wants to be the executive producer of the show that drops the bomb, but he does not want to manage the mess, and particularly managing that mess without any of our allies actively supporting us. So, if you're going to go into a war like this, you want to have a coalition of the willing. He obviously is not even trying. He stormed out of the G7 meeting. So I think that's one of the reasons why you had this blink yesterday when he comes up with the, 2 weeks or maybe 2 months or maybe never, or maybe he'll just forget about it or whatever it is he does with that.
Do you have any sense of where Vice President Vance is on this? I don't know what we've heard from him about Iran, what we think his perspective of. He's obviously another big figure in the room, so we think. And I'm curious what we know about him.
Yeah, yeah, I'm not sure he's a big figure in the room,
Yeah,
but
fair enough.
he's obviously going to be watched very, very carefully by the isolationist wing of the party, which is substantial. And look, he's doing the tightrope walk. He's not going to distance himself from Trump in any way whatsoever. Um, but he has played a relatively muted role because he understands that his entire brand is tied up with Trump, but also with a certain view of America's role in the world. So that will be interesting.
And that I wanted to touch on just
Yeah.
two other things. the protests the other week, the No Kings
Mhm.
protest day, which were very significant, certainly in
Yeah.
terms of scale and scope. What kind of impact do you think that has on the administration of the Republican coalition, if at all?
I don't know that it has any impact on the Republican coalition. It has much more impact, I think, on the resistance and on the Democrats who needed a morale boost. I think they needed the sense that they were doing something, and the crowds were huge, and they were peaceful, which I thought was extraordinarily important. I think that was really the key thing, is that from Trump's point of view, he's spoiling for a fight. He wants confrontations. He is provoking confrontations. He would have loved if they would have taken the bait and showed up with the Mexican flags and fire bombs and all kinds. I'm not conflating the two, but things that would play on Fox News. He didn't get that image, and I think that it was a very tough day for him. His very underwhelming parade in Washington D.C. with a split screen of hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Americans standing up. And I think that, again, sometimes you preach to the choir because you want them to sing. I mean, it's they. So there's a value to that. Don't over. I would also though suggest don't over analyze the fact that you had huge crowds turning out in predominantly blue areas, but it was necessary. It's sort of necessary but not sufficient, just from a morale point of view. And also just a reminder. Look, the political leaders, the people in Congress, are not going to lead the effective opposition to Donald Trump. It's not going to come from Chuck Schumer. It is up to the American people. It is up to the people who came out on Saturday. Because if you're waiting for the politicians to do it, you're going to wait a very long time.
And speaking of politicians, the one thing that has been quite notable has been the arrest or variations of arrest of government officials, Senator Padilla, Brad Lander, the New York mayoral candidate, the judge in Wisconsin. That
Yes.
almost seems like ages ago. What do you make of this? And again, from the perspective also of conservatism and this movement to see this happening, I'm curious what you think.
Well, there's two things. Again, it's not just the arrests. Can I just? But here's a slight digression. The fact that you're having people snatched and arrested by masked officers who are reluctant to identify themselves ought to shock the conscience of every American. But particularly that whole libertarian swath of the conservative movement that was always concerned about, the overreach of government. Where is the pushback against the abrogation of due process? Clearly, ICE and the Trump administration were not embarrassed by the fallout from the arrest and handcuffing of Senator Padilla. And I think I commented on this afterwards. I said one of the most troubling things about that was not just the incident, it was the pure glee of MAGA about his treatment, the defense of it, which basically said, we're all in on this. We like this. We enjoy this, and we're going to do more of it. So there is an element of the Trump regime that actually is quite serious about targeting, arresting, and criminally charging some Democratic politicians. They want to criminalize the opposition. And again, if you listen to what Donald Trump has been saying about retribution and revenge and going after the communists, the radicals, the terrorists, etc., we ought not to be surprised. We could be shocked, but we shouldn't be surprised.
And and I mean, the other part of it is it normalizes it. I mean,
Yeah.
you start to see this over and over,
Right.
and it loses some of its shock value, which is probably the most shocking and dangerous element about this.
Okay, that is a really important point because we're not only normalizing the fact that we have active duty military now on the streets of American cities. We're going to have more of that, but we are seeing the routine arrest of elected officials who are, in many cases, doing their jobs or attempting to do their jobs, and this has never occurred. You go back to what we used to think of as some of the most dangerous moments, say, and under Richard Nixon, this was not happening. But this is clearly an intentional policy, and it's something that they want more of. And this is the key thing: They want more of it. They're not just willing to tolerate it, they are going out of their way to do it. There was no question in New York. They knew who Brad Lander was. He's in the hallway. They made a conscious decision. And that's because they've been told, if you see political leaders, high profile people who are getting in your face, go ahead, arrest them. This is okay. And so that green light is not just in New York and LA, it's everywhere. And I think to your point of normalization, when the troops show up in Chicago, when they show up in Milwaukee, when they show up in Detroit, when you have politicians in Michigan and Pennsylvania who are arrested, at that point it's going to become out of what the number 5, number 6 in the news cycle, and it will be numbed and normalized.
And the final thing I wanted to ask you, and I've asked you variants of this, but I'm always curious where you are. One of the most powerful parts, I think, of conservatism was the libertarian strand
Yeah.
because it really resonated in many American values and ones that,
Mhm.
had strength outside Republican circles. Can that libertarian strand of the Republican conservative tradition survive what we're watching now with all the issues we've discussed?
Maybe not as part of the Republican Party, because I don't see us snapping back. However, I do think that there is a potential libertarian moment coming up as people really do get a glimpse of what a too powerful government is. I think you have a lot of people now talking about the importance of due process, individual rights, putting limits on government, putting significant constraints around government, and so I do think that there's going to be an audience for that libertarianism, and maybe this is for a different conversation, but and I'm sort of thinking this through in real time here, Julian, thinking of writing an article about what the themes ought to be going forward, because I hear all this talk about, our democracy is under threat. This is a threat to democracy. I think democracy has become an overused term. And I'm afraid I'm going to be misunderstood here. But at some point, perhaps we ought to talk more about, that freedom is what is at stake, that it is freedom that is under attack. And so while democracy, I think, has become kind of a stale cliche for the resistance, it's more than just democracy. It's that whole panoply of constitutionally protected rights that are so fundamental and which are being destroyed in real time. And I think that at a certain point, people tune out certain terms. They tune out certain rhetoric. I think that's perhaps happened. But if you start having resistance leaders, including Democrats, say, what's really at stake? It's democracy, but it's also freedom. It's fairness. It is due process. It's whether or not we do have a rule of law that you can count on. I think that might have a little bit more resonance than a phrase that we've been throwing around for the last several years. But this is a work in progress.
Well, as you write that and think about it, there's a great book by historian Eric Foner, and it uses freedom. He wrote a book on Reconstruction, but he wrote another book, and freedom is kind of the dominant theme of American politics. And he looks at how it's contested in every era. So it actually fits quite nicely with what you're thinking. So you have to write the article, and then we'll talk about it
Yeah,
on
thank you.
Substacks. The long view to the contrary. Charlie, thanks for joining as always.
Okay, thank you.
Bye bye.